So, when I ask UX people who practice user research, what is their biggest challenge? What I hear from them usually is that it's hard to engage stakeholders with research. What do you think about that?
I think if you sterilize the research process, that's exactly what will happen. I think if you set the research process up so that the stakeholders are involved, you get a very different reaction. It takes a bit of political care to pull that off. So if you don't have any sort of political weight in the organization, you're not going to get the stakeholders' attention. But there are ways to do things. In some organizations, it's as simple as saying no. Right? So we won't do this unless you come. We won't do this unless you participate. You cannot have a say in the outcome unless you participate all the way through. We won't be doing a report. So if you want to know what the findings are, you have to participate. We won't be doing recommendations. Those are techniques for sort of forcing the stakeholders to be a part of the process, because the only way they're going to get value is to be there. I think one of the mistakes that we have made in the UX field, in the user research part of the UX field, has been trying to be soup to nuts. We'll do everything. So we just go off and we act like a service bureau and we produce these results. And I think that's created this perception that they don't need to be involved. And then you give them something and they're not engaged, right?
What are the things you think they should be involved in?
Oh, well, they should be involved in figuring out who you select for the recruitment of the study. They should be involved in getting the information that comes out of the recruitment process, because every person you talk to, whether they're in the study or out of the study, yields really interesting information during the recruitment process. They should actually be participating in the study elements itself. They should be there for the rehearsal. They should be there for the actual visits or testing or whatever the research is. They should be there for the interstitial discussions about what you're seeing and what you're collecting and what this data is beginning to look like. And then they should be there through the analysis process. So, that's a huge commitment, right? And these people are often very busy people. So you may have to barter and say, well, okay, if you can't be here for all of it, you have to be here for some of it. But I know a lot of our clients are now sort of taking the tact of, you don't get any say in the outcome if you're not part of at least a few hours of it. It's key. And the basic rule of thumb is that every stakeholder, along with everybody on the team, needs at least 2 hours of exposure to real people using real designs, whether it's your design or your competitor's design, every 6 weeks. That's the bare minimum. You don't get that, you're not going to see any improvement. So they have to be part of that.
And what do you mean by political care? Is that it, or are there things as well?
Well, I think I think for a lot of folks it has to do with how much political weight you carry, right? Like I said, if you're low down in the hierarchy, and you've got someone 5 levels above you who's a stakeholder, and that person doesn't know you from Adam, there's no way you're going to get them to participate in anything. So you've got to somehow work the system so that the people who have some political authority get there. That's a reality. But there are, like I said, there are ways to sort of manipulate. You say, look, if the stakeholders don't participate, then they're not going to be engaged. If they're not engaged, then down the road, they're just going to do what they want. They're going to say, this doesn't make any sense. We're going to do what we want. So why should we bother to do this? It's a lot of expense. It's a lot of effort. If the stakeholders are just going to do what they want, let's just find out what they want and do that. And if the product doesn't succeed, well, at least we'll have learned that what stakeholders want isn't what our customers want. And we can go from there. But, if they're serious about doing any sort of user research activity, then part of the price of doing that activity is their time and insight.
All right. Imagine an in-house UX researcher who's always trying to identify opportunities for impactful research. What would you recommend they do to better identify such opportunities?
Oh, well, there's a ton of stuff. The rule of thumb is to follow the money. Okay? So, whenever you have a user experience problem, right? Something's not right with the user experience. It results in frustration on somebody's part. Maybe your customer is frustrated. Maybe your user who didn't pay for it, because somebody else paid for it, is frustrated. Maybe you've got support people who are frustrated because they get all these stupid questions. Maybe you have a developer who's frustrated because they're redoing code that they thought was done, right? Somebody's frustrated. And in each of those frustrations, it typically shows itself somewhere on your bottom line. You're not getting repeat sales. People are refusing to buy the product in the first place because it looks too complicated. You are racking up support time, which costs money to answer support questions. You're racking up developer time, which costs money to get development done. So, bottom line, you see an effect. So we have frustration, we have a bottom line effect. Almost always within any organization, there's already someone in charge of fixing that bottom line problem. They may not know what to do, but they know that their job is either to reduce those expenses or increase that revenue. Find that person. That person will be your best friend, because you're going to go to them and say, I know how to solve your problem. I know what it's going to take, because all we have to do is talk to the people who are frustrated and then remove that frustration, and that's my specialty. So that's what you need to do. And that person usually has a decent amount of authority and power and will be really excited because you're about to make them a hero.
So I'm hearing that you should take the backstage and empower others and make others the center, not yourself, not research.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of the Omar Gaddafi way of leadership, right? Where you declare things and you make things happen. But that's not how real things get done in the world, right? Real things get done in the world by people working together in groups. And it doesn't really matter who does it. And it doesn't matter who's front stage. I shy away from any project where it's all about convincing management that UX is important. That's a ridiculous notion. Any manager who needs that convincing, the organization isn't going to go anywhere anyways. If they already, and chances are they have that convincing. And in fact, in this day and age, all of them have iPads. They know what good user experience is about. Since they know that, all you have to do is say, hey, we could be like that. And you know what? I can help you get there. That's what it's about.
All right. UX researchers sometimes experience a tension between conducting research they are asked to do by their stakeholders, for example, a product manager, versus research they were not asked to do, but they think they should do. What are your thoughts on balancing this tension?
Well, I guess this is a question as to this comes down to more of the culture of the organization, right? You know, if you're in this mode where people are coming to you and saying, we need you to run a study on X, chances are you're already behind the game, because someone else has had an entire conversation about what the problem is and you weren't there. So the real issue isn't, well, you should be coming up with your own projects. The real problem is you weren't involved in that conversation. And that conversation shouldn't be, we know how to solve our problem, you have to give us information to get there. That conversation should be, we have a problem and we should figure out what the best way to get information is, right? Because user research is all about informed decision making. The whole goal of user research is to make it so that decisions are more informed. And if you're not informing the decision making process, you're suffering. And if you are letting other people decide how you are going to inform, it's sort of like going to a dentist and saying, I need a cap on my number 3 molar, right? No dentist would ever let you do that. The dentist is going to actually do a full diagnostic and then say, hey, what I think you need is you need a crown on that number 3 molar. I can see why you're doing that, right? But that's only after they've done a fair amount of work, and they do it with you. It's a collaborative thing, right? You should be in that conversation. So maybe you do the first project, but you say, you know what, next time, let's look at what other projects you have. Since you seem to like user research, let's talk about this, because I actually have a whole bunch of tools in my toolbox that you don't know about.
All right. The book includes a piece you authored a few years ago about getting team consensus by implementing the KJ technique. What are some key aspects of using this technique instead of writing a report?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive. You can write reports and use the technique. The technique is basically about getting a team in a very small amount of time, usually about 40 to 50 minutes, to come to a consensus on the priorities of what start out as dozens, if not hundreds, of little things. By little things, they could be results of user research, they could be ideas about what to do about the next design, they could be who are our users, they could be what are the big problems we're trying to solve, anything, right? You have some question, you start with that question, and what you end up with is a prioritized list of what to do. The most recent one I did, team had spent a week and a half going out and visiting 14 different customers in the field, and came back with about 250 things they thought they could fix right away. And we used the technique to prioritize which things to fix first. And so that's what the technique is about. And what the interesting thing about it is that it lets you get through this large amount of information, 250 items, in 45 minutes. And the way you do that is there's a sorting process, there's a categorizing process. All of that is done silently without discussion so that you're not spending time arguing over things. You just do it. And 99% of the time, any conflict that resolves works itself out just silently, and it's just dealt with, so it's very fast. And then there's a democratic voting process, and then a reconciliation process where you take things that people might have misunderstood from the top items that were voted, and you reconcile them and combine them together to understand the true value. And what you end up with after that process is everybody contributing equally. So the power players in the room, whether they be the stakeholders or the really loud people on the team, do not overwhelm the quiet, non-powerful folk on the team. Everybody has an equal say through the process. The result is something that everybody agrees to. Therefore, you get more buy-in, and people are more engaged with that result.
What other techniques can people use?
There's dozens.
With stakeholders?
There's dozens. I've slowly been writing these up over the years. There's a technique for abstracting attributes from something. So, for example, a team that we went to visit, or a team that I was with, we went to visit 12 or 14 different customers. What we did was at each customer we saw 1 to 3 people. So we came back with about 30 people that we visited across the 14 customer sites. And we put their pictures and some rough notes about who they were on sheets of paper. And then the first thing we did was we figured out which of these people are most important for the projects we were working on. So we'd already identified which were the most important projects to work on based on the research. So now we said, okay, so which of these people were most important? So we picked out the top people with a method that that's called dot voting, where you give everybody some number of dots. I gave everybody 6 dots, and they're little stickers, and they just put a dot on each piece of paper. And they have to write down on the piece of paper why they voted for this person. So what was it about this person that they think is really important for their stuff? So what ends up happening is you now have a whole bunch of dots, and you take the people with the most dots, you take the 2 most dotted people you visited, and you put them side by side next to each other. And then you ask the question, what's the same and what's different between these 2 people? And you just say, okay, so well, this person tends to use the product as an administrator, and this person's just a user. So okay, so that's one difference. Are they an administrator? And you write that up. And it says, this person has a lot of PC experience, and that person doesn't. So you write PC experience down. This person doesn't tend to deal with customers directly. Okay, deals with customers directly. So every difference, every similarity, you write down on a sheet of paper. And then when you've exhausted those 2 people, you take away the person who had the most votes, and you replace it with the person with the 3rd most votes, and you repeat the process. What do these 2 people have in common and different? And you look for things that you haven't mentioned before. And the whole idea is to come up with a list of attributes. You do that with 6, 7 people out of the 30 that we had, and all of a sudden we've got most of the differences that one could imagine between the different customers we went through. And now we've got this list of attributes. And those attributes describe things that could be important in our design based on the research that we did. So now what we can do is we can actually create scales for those attributes. So typically what we do is I'll pick one of the projects we're going to work on, or maybe I'll take the team, depending on how big it is, and I'll divide them into small groups, so 2, 3 people groups, something like that. And I'll say, okay, each group, you have one of the top problems that we're going to work on. Each one gets a different problem. Now, pick the attributes that are most important to your problem. Again, we'll probably use something like dot voting for that. And then, once we have the attributes for a given problem, we create scales. Okay, so we have PC experience. What is on one side of that scale, what's on the other, based on the people we met, right? Frequency of shopping online. What's on one side of the scale, what's on another. And then what I can do is I can go through all the people who we visited, and I can actually put them on that scale. And now I'm beginning to work towards a persona. And those are different techniques, right? We've got dot voting, we've got what we call pairwise analysis, we've got attribute scaling, we've got placing people on the scale, right? 4 different techniques. They're all tricks for doing things.
And how are these helpful with engaging stakeholders?
Well, they're right there. Every piece of the conversation is about who are your users in that particular case. And how do they relate to the problems we're trying to solve. And which users are important and which ones aren't. And why are they important, right? And because you're talking about these real things and not some sort of, well, we think that soccer moms like this product better than, techno dads, right? We're not talking in terms of these wacky demographic things. We are talking in terms of, hey, when we visited Marianne, who was the receptionist at the hair salon, her problem was that she couldn't deal with our customer support while she was trying to answer phones. So she needed a way to deal with customer support to solve this problem. That was like chat or something, because she can't tie up a phone line and sit on support while she's trying to take appointments. Right? That's a real world problem. That's a real thing that comes up. That the only way you're going to get to that is by seeing it, and then the only way you're going to solve it is by really understanding it in depth.
All right. Many UX practitioners are always looking for creative deliverables that engage their stakeholders with research findings. What are some deliverables you found to be working well for you?
Deliverables are for me, not a big deal. I am not a big fan of production grade deliverables. Because I don't think most teams need them. I think teams figure out their own deliverables. They talk, a deliverable is a negotiated thing. So you have to really go to the people who are going to be the recipients, and you're going to say, what do you need from me? And then you build something that meets their needs. There are no sort of generic deliverables that just work every time. But there are some things that I think are really important. One of the things that I think we slack off on is the creative brief. The creative brief needs to exist before any sort of project endeavor. Before you do your first brainstorms, before you do your first sketching, you need to have a creative brief. And I think people don't put this together. It doesn't have to be a fancy document. Personally, in my mind, it's got 4 things in it. It's got the goal of that particular assignment. So we're going to make appointment scheduling easier to do, right? Or maybe the issue is we're going to make rescheduling an appointment. We're going to focus just on rescheduling an appointment. Or we're going to focus on printing a receipt. Whatever the project is, right? No matter how small, we're going to do this creative brief. 1-2 sentence problem description. Then we're going to put in the personas we're using. Of course we have personas, right? Research-based personas. If we don't have that, then we're just making stuff up. But hopefully we have research-based personas. Who uses this thing? And the specific scenario, which again should be research-based, something we actually saw in the field. So, the receptionist, Mary, our receptionist, is able to actually take a customer and reschedule their appointment because she can't make it today. Customer calls up, can't do it today. Is her hairdresser available tomorrow? Is it available the week after? Right? That's what she wants to know. How do we reschedule that appointment? So that's that piece. And then finally, the design principles that you've created that talk to those specific things. What are the design principles you're following? And these should be very research-driven design principles that you picked. So, for example, you might be in a mode where you're focusing on making things more discoverable instead of being complete, and that's the design principles that we're emphasizing discoverability over completeness. So we focus on that. So those 4 things: the problem statement, the persona, the scenarios for those personas, and the design principles are the 4 key things that you put into the creative brief. So that's a very important deliverable to have very much, because that says this is where we're going with this. This is how we'll know we're done, right? Because we've solved this problem for this scenario following these design principles. That's what that is. On the back end, what do you need for deliverables? That's going to depend on who you're passing it off to. Some people want working code. Some people want sketches. Some people want, a diagram, a wireframe that's got call-outs on it. That's a negotiated thing between you and the people you're handing stuff off to. Dan Brown has this fabulous book. Do we have the fabulous book here? I don't know where it is. It's in the other office. Dan Brown has a fabulous book on great deliverables. But the fact is that you don't have to do any of those and you can still succeed. You could do all of them and fail. The deliverables do not make the project.
All right. Mm-hmm. Last question. What's your take on stakeholders, designers, product managers, software engineers actually moderating studies?
Oh, I think that why wouldn't you do that? I mean, that's a crazy question. I think that why are they any worse at it than we are? I mean, that's nuts. Of course they should moderate studies.
Some people are afraid of handing that assignment.
I'm afraid of letting usability people do it. I think whenever I get frustrated watching someone moderate, it's almost always a usability person. So I would resist letting them moderate. They have no excuse for getting it wrong. I think that if you have people moderating poorly, then that's a training problem. And you know what? There are some trained usability professionals who I've seen do an awful job of running a study. So I don't think that having people moderate is a problem. But here's the deal. I think it's really hard to moderate and take notes. And I think it's far more valuable for the person whose project it is to take notes than to moderate. So what we always do is we recommend a buddy system. On my project, I'd love it if you would moderate. And on your project, I will be happy to moderate. I'll be your buddy. And we'll just keep switching off. And so I can focus, because a good moderator focuses on making sure that the participant is comfortable in the study, that they're not getting stressed out, making sure that you hit all the buttons and you test all the things you wanted to test, making sure that all the observers are getting all the information they need, right? The model we use is called flight attendant, sportscaster, scientist, right? So you break it down into those three categories, and that's what a moderator does. The issue is that if you're doing all that, that's a lot of work. You can't take notes. It takes so much practice to be able to take notes and moderate at the same time. So if it's important that you get everything you want to get, you need to be the one taking notes. Not do it. Of course, you could always use a video camera. You could always go back and watch the study afterwards. It's a perfectly legitimate process, especially if you have lots of free time, because that's what it takes. But I know lots of people do it that way, and they're quite content doing it that way. But other than that, that's that. And I don't think there's an issue with people doing it wrong any more than anybody else doing it wrong. And that's just a training issue. And so moderator training, definitely something that should be part of every program. And practice, right? How often do we as a group critique each other's moderation, right? We need to do that. We need to be talking about how we did that, actually playing back videos and saying, I like what you did here. That was really cool. I'm going to start doing that myself. Or what were you thinking when you did this? What was your process? What were you hoping to go for? Do you think it turned out the way you wanted it to? Right? And using the same techniques we would use to critique a design, which I'm hoping are gentle and constructive techniques, to critique how we each moderate, so we can all get better at it. And we should do that with the whole team, not just with the moderators, because that should be what we do. And we should, as UX professionals, be looking around the room and saying, hey, you've never moderated a study. Why don't you moderate the next one? Watch me do this one, and then you moderate the next one. Oh, and by the way, at some point I'll show you some tricks. Maybe we'll do some practice. I regularly teach teams to moderate with origami animals. You go to any craft store, you get origami paper. It costs $2.99 for a package of 30 sheets. You go to the web, you type in origami duck or swan, you print out the instructions, and then you say, okay, you're the participant, you're the moderator, I'll take a third person, we'll make you the observer. Now let's run a little usability test. We're going to test out the usability of these instructions and run it like a real usability test. And I'm going to watch you, and I'm going to give you pointers on how you can moderate better. And you go through the whole process. Introductory, you tell them what your purpose of the study is, you explain to them what they're expected of them, how, we're not testing you, we're testing the design. You ask them probing questions, you let them make mistakes and go back, you talk about, what's going on, you find out if they're stressed or not, you react to that. There are all these different elements to that, right? So you practice. If you want to get good at something, you have to practice it. So everybody should be practicing all the time. You should be doing that regularly.
All right. Anything else you want to add about engaging stakeholders with research?
I don't think you have to worry about engaging them with research. I think if they're unengaged with research, go find someone who's engaged. I mean, you know, it's.
Sometimes you don't have a choice.
Oh, you always have a choice, right? If an organization is not ready to do research, why are you working there? And if their stakeholders aren't engaged in the research, why are you bothering, right? I don't buy this idea that you're stuck in an organization where you're being asked to do research that the stakeholders are going to ignore. Just tell them it's silly for them to pay for it, right? And if that means you might lose your job, well, I guess that's a risk, except for the fact that right now the job market for really good researchers is the best it's ever been. There are so many companies out there and so many organizations, universities, government organizations, nonprofits that are ready to do this. They can't find enough good people. So I'm really stuck on this idea that somehow or other you have to go ahead and do research with unengaged stakeholders. You just tell them point blank, it's not worth, you know, the energy if you're not going to participate. The old saying is outsourcing your research is like outsourcing your vacation, right? And if these stakeholders want to outsource the research, it's not going to have the effect they want it to have. Even if that's outsourcing it just to you as a lowly researcher. So you say, look, I'm not going to bother. You know, I will interview you, find out what the design should be, and tell the team that's what we should build. I'm not going to bother to ask users what they want if you're not participating in the study. It's not worth anybody's effort, and we'll get done faster.
All right.
And it got loud in here.
Yeah.